Okay, Dover from Darth Hader. With the metrics and the telemetry that you guys have running for the Old Republic, how is that scaling as the testing moves on? Because you guys are increasingly putting more people on. Of course, my phone's going to ding. The scalability on that, is that really working out, or
so without going into
obviously,
technicals?
yeah.
I mean, disk space is cheap, right? Bandwidth is not so cheap, but it's still relatively cheap. I wouldn't assume that we can run the full set of telemetry once we have like launch capacity, but then again, at that point, we should have ironed out a lot of the things that you need the detailed information for. So we try to get as much as we can with technical means.
Musco from Torcast. So one of the things I thought was interesting was yesterday I was talking to Zach from Mos Eisley Radio about the Black Talon Flashpoint, and they had way different experience on the bosses than we did. Like bosses that we just breezed through and thought were easy, they were wiping on. And the only boss that we struggled on, they were like, that's the only boss we beat without anyone dying. Do you use the same similar metrics to weigh how to balance flashpoints as well?
We're looking at the entire game through those goggles, but as I explained yesterday already to some group in an interview, we're generally looking at metrics as a way to understand player feedback. So we don't usually look at it as a way of like just fishing around for problems. Rather go and see what our testers say about the flashpoint, where they encounter problems, and then we use it basically to debug what is actually happening, what is happening to everyone, is this isolated experiences, these kind of things. And then you find that, well, different people, different group makeups, different problems, right? And I think our job at that point is make sure that no one hits a hard wall. It's fine if you die. Flashpoints shouldn't be easy. It's good when you can learn from dying. If you can come back, if your group resurrects or you learn from your mistake, you do a different approach. Maybe it fails again, but on the third time you get through. I think that makes for a good play experience. Like, we're not afraid of death as part of the game experience. Hell, BioWare's Baldur's Gate, all you did was dying, but was also a very incredibly fun game, right? So there's always a kind of a balance. As long as the player feels that they can make progress, they can learn, they can improve, and then actually have some kind of achievement of going through there and beating it, I think it is good.
You showed us a map earlier and you were talking about symmetry. Are all the maps going to be symmetrical, or is there any asymmetrical maps?
The Warzone maps?
Yeah, it was. The PvP map, you even talked about the sun being perfectly placed in the middle so that everything is perfectly balanced. Is there a way we're going to see asymmetrical maps, or is it?
I think so, yes.
And how do you gauge the fairness of that kind of thing?
Well, it really depends on what I would call the game mode, right? If it's a in this case, capture the objective kind of map, the symmetry really helps. If there's another scenario, which I don't know if Gabe talked about or not. Yeah, so Gabe talked about Void Star. I don't think Void Star is symmetrical because you have an attack-defense scenario, so you have different objectives in the team switches, and then you don't have to do symmetry. Right?
Yeah, the symmetry would be built into the scenario itself, not into the map, because you're changing roles. Yeah,
and I think this is a well understood kind of game design decisions. If you can look at even minor things like color affecting games like Team Fortress to the point of 3, 4, 5%, it's good to eliminate those. There's enough we have to balance with classes, with player skills, with guilds, and all the other factors that can imbalance PvP. I think eliminating the obvious ones definitely helps.
Hey, David, Tor Wars. How are you feeling right now about the placement of mobs and the level of challenge in the Origin worlds? Compared to a lot of other MMOs, I felt like I was dying more often and aggroing a lot of mobs. I was playing a bounty hunter and now a smuggler, but I kind of felt it in both cases.
Okay. So that's actually the game you've been playing today isn't the most recent version of the game, and in fact, yeah, this is kind of the hard build where the Origin worlds actually, according to our tester feedbacks and numerous very colorful heat maps, were very death intensive. Now, we definitely don't want to be on the easy side. But there's something to be said for not kicking the player in the face in the first couple of hours while they learn the ropes, right? So we've adjusted the difficulty on those things. We've done various things like reduce aggro radii on the origin worlds, and generally I think made a much smoother experience. The new UI that is coming into the game also has a better way of like reading the difficulty of a creature. The one you've been playing with is a bit subtle in some cases, and subtle doesn't really work well. So yeah, this is stuff that we're addressing, and that's why we run testing, basically.
So this actually, with the addition of supporting roles, adding healing and tanking roles to classes that were previously damage only. What about like the telemetry and how that affects your advanced class split, and then the possibility of having diverse damage types within a build, like the sniper being damage only or the marauder being damage only can have diverse damage types and things like that. How does that affect those maps? I mean, that's just another variable layer.
You have to actually understand that looking at a consular doesn't mean much after level 10, because a consular can be anything after level 10. And if you want to understand what problems a specific consular or a specific subset of consular is facing, you need to look further and see what their skill distribution was. Are they going more into the shadow on the advanced class side versus the sage, which have very different approaches to combat? Even then, further down, maybe the sage was very much on the healing side? Did they have a companion? The companion that they used was balancing it out properly, and so on. It's incredibly complex. There's very many variables that you need to look at when you drill down into these things.
And the layers actually go so deep as to get into even skill sets and specs for that?
Yes, we know pretty much everything about every character that is created, every choice you make, everything.
So one of the things I thought was interesting, and I know I've spoken about with you before, but hybridization seems really crazy in Tor. One of the things I noticed today, since we got a chance to play PvP, is I was playing a trooper, and I was playing a healing trooper. I was spec'ing as a combat medic, but yet I spent probably about 80% of my time in the war zone killing people. And I mean, but I also spent a lot of time healing as well. So my question is if you look at someone who's a DPS class and you compare them, so let's say someone who's a DPS trooper, and then you compare them to someone like me who was playing the medic version of a trooper, how's the damage going to be comparable between the two? Because I really felt like, even though I was there as a healer, I very much so contributed to killing people, not just healing them. Is that going to continue into the end game?
It's intentional. I think you will see the classes diverge more as you gain levels, which is natural. In the end, the way your class roles diverge more and become more specialized is by you spending or making the conscious choice to spend into specialized trees, right? Will a DPS trooper outdamage a healing trooper quite like visibly? Yes, of course, but not around the level that you've played the Warzone. Towards the end of the game, I think, you will see much more spread between these classes if people choose to spec that way. I mean, you could spec, or you could try to spec more 50-50. There's obviously some drawback to that. You're going to miss out on some really good abilities that are more on the top of the trees. But we actually think it is beneficial to the game to have a certain level of hybridization during the level up gameplay.
Jeff Hollis, TorWars.com. You talked about tracing various characters and various builds all across both PvE and PvP. When you see a trend in terms of build, from skill tree builds, and that trend becomes really, really common, do you guys adjust to make other builds more attractive or more viable? And do you go that deep when you're looking at individual builds to spot trends within them?
Yes. At this point, not too deep. In fact, this becomes a matter of sample size, like how many people do you have playing. As we increase testing, we will increase drilling down on these things, and obviously you want to get your balance down before you ship, because no one likes nerfs. Right.
But if you see like a specific build, do you? I don't want to say do you necessarily nerf that build because it's so popular, but do you?
I think the first step is actually to understand why is it so popular.
That's really my question.
And we've had cases where we basically stumbled upon really interesting gameplay that people like that wasn't intentional, and we then look at it and see, is that something we can actually support officially? Do we want to do that? And in some of those cases, yes, we do that.
Well, this might not be discussable, but it just came to mind.
Try me.
Are you looking at real similar metrics in the space game? Plotting, difficulty and where people are dying?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Came to mind. Sorry. Short and sweet.
Yeah, the movement maps might be very one-sided in the space game, but yes.
Not much exploration.
Like player engagement measuring, I think, works across everything. It's not limited even to like the game. You can just as well apply it to the UI. You can see where's more activity. Do people find, like a really good example in the build you're playing? Has any of you found the looking for group function? Yeah, we know that, right? We know that 7% of our testers find it. So that's obviously not great. So the new UI will improve on that, right? So we're optimizing not just the gameplay elements of it. We're trying to optimize the game based on what is our expectation for the user and what are the users doing. And obviously sometimes the users set the expectations. If they find something that is really fun for them, they exploit something in a way that we didn't anticipate, we're not going to just dismiss that outright. We're actually going to look at it and see, does this help? There's a really bunch of interesting even quest mechanics in the game that kind of developed that way.
Going to Musko's comment about doing damage in PvP, and then as I said earlier with the healing specs and the tank specs, there's been a bit of a hubbub that DPS-only advanced classes, ones that don't have an ulterior supporting role, will, by definition, according to some, always be the preferred damage class because of they're only dealing with damage. Do you have any comments or questions about the idea of a DPS trooper compared to a DPS smuggler?
Sure, why not? You mean a gunslinger in this case?
Or in gunslinger, yeah.
A
exactly.
gunslinger versus a trooper that is more down in the DPS spec. Yeah, sure. So I would say first off, I mean, you have to play the game in order to actually judge that, right? And
no, they don't. Damn it. They can say whatever they want.
They can say, and it is certainly everyone's right to basically use their previous experience with any other MMO to make such statements, and that's fine. We're not dismissing that outright, right? We have plenty of people on average. I'm pretty sure that every one of our testers has played at least one MMO, if not more. So you can be sure that feedback that is seen on the general forums, if our testers encounter the same thing in game and it is a problem to them, we will get that surfaced to us, right? It's a fact that the majority of players prefer the DPS role. It is mitigated a bit, as you've noticed, at least in the progression level up, is that we do have more hybridization and we do have the companions, which add an interesting twist on that gameplay as well. We were discussing at some point to look at like the gunslinger and see would we put another role onto that class, and ultimately we felt that it wasn't necessary because the gameplay we have for those classes is actually pretty good. It's testing really well. The Marauder is another one of those classes. They have very diverse gameplay. I think a really good player that really optimizes some of the more complex builds in there. Like you can actually play a complex damage build that requires you to keep track of maybe dots that you've stacked up and procs and these kind of elements. I think they could be more damage efficient, but I don't think it is in a realm that can't be overcome by other means for other players. If that is clear,
Yeah, I think that's probably a clearer answer than anyone was expecting to get.
Yeah, people always seem to think that we're avoiding, and that's actually not the case.
So one of the things I was curious of, and I know I heard a lot of people say this, especially after Tarl, but even now today getting to play PvP, is that the amount of skills that you have becomes daunting. Like, I mean, even at level 20, I mean, you look and I had like 13, 15 skills, and I'm only level 20. And I mean, I'm not even going to ask about macros or anything like that, because I know you guys probably won't talk about them unless you want to. But,
Which we would encourage.
Right. But, I mean, how do you deal with that? I mean, I've already seen so many skills, and I've only been a lower level. The idea of getting 30 more levels of skills.
So, I think the important part is, what do people say if they've naturally played to 20, right? Are they getting overwhelmed? Are there too many skills that, in the frequency of their use, indicate that they are very marginal, right? We're definitely, as a goal, looking at having your standard rotations for various scenarios to be more in the 4 or 5 skills than in the 2 or 3 skill realm, right? Because more diverse gameplay, more interesting gameplay, is generally more fun. That said, yes, if there's too many skills and there's skills that basically, I need to keep track of that and use that often and so on, that can become problematic. So what we're looking at when we talk to testers, when we analyze the data we're getting is, are people overwhelmed if they naturally play to 20? You need to remember we took you at level 8 of the Origin worlds, and we, basically robbed you of the experience of slowly building up developing your rotation, developing where you're going. I think, out of hand, we might have a bit more skill, like active abilities, than comparable games, but not by much. It's actually not that big. The skill trees, if you looked at them, they have a bunch of actives in there, but there's a lot of gameplay altering, passives in there as well that improve on certain skills, like the ability to throw 2 rocks as a consular rather than 1. These kind of things.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yesterday, when we were first doing our gameplay, I played an Imperial agent. My companion turned out to be what appears to be a gunslinger. She's certainly a ranged DPS companion.
Kaleo.
And that's probably not the most desirable companion for me as a ranged DPS class myself. Are you doing something to make those classes, which are not necessarily naturally desirable, not a healer, not a tank, for someone like the Imperial Agent, are you doing something special for those companion characters to make them more useful, more desirable, to make them equal across the board with the other companions I have available?
So, yeah, there's an interesting balancing act there. On one hand, we could make every companion the same except for their story and the visual outfit, and that would balance everything perfectly. Or we could go the route that you're seeing right now, which is every character is actually very different. Like if you're at the Jedi Knight, get your little droid, plays very different. But we also see that creates a lot of problems. Like at the moment, on our test servers, we see bounty hunters level faster than anyone else. And after, digging into it more and more, it comes down to Mako, being an early, support healing character, that reduces downtime, right? So it's something that we've been testing various configurations. We put something out for test. We see how does it affect gameplay? How do people like it? What's the feedback in general for the companions versus the feedback for the class? How does it affect each other? And I think we're trending to look at something where the first companion that you're getting is a bit more in the jack of all trade kind of scenario, where you can equip them with the role you want. And then we give you your stable of companion across the story. But that's not definite. We're basically looking at that. It's very much on our mind right now.
If I might follow up, at the end game, it's easy for me to imagine scenarios in which, for most people playing, say, a trooper, they're going to choose one of maybe 2 companions when they have a stable of 5 or 6. Are you guys okay with that? I mean, are you cognizant of the fact that that's likely?
If I give you 5 cars, would you drive them evenly, or would you end up finding your personal preference and drive it?
Right. It would. That's what I'm thinking is probably going to happen in the game.
Yes.
Okay.
We want you, as you play with your companions, we definitely don't want you to dismiss a companion because of their combat viability, even though you really like their story or where they're going as a character, or your way to even affect where they're going as a character. But ultimately, there's always going to be certain things that will probably make more sense in some scenarios than others. I think what we're going to try to do with that is, if you can be happy choosing between 2 and 3, and the next trooper next to you maybe chooses 2 of the same, but another one for another reason, we're happy with that. We don't expect everyone to love everything equal. It's the same as with classes. We know for a fact there will be much fewer Imperial agents than Jedi Knights. That's a fact. We designed the game for that. It's something about fantasy fulfillment and how people perceive the class that they want to play. We can measure that. We can look at what do people play when they first enter the game. The first character they make, that tells us what their fantasy is, what they think they want to play. We sample that again at 5 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours, 24 hours, 72 hours, and so on. And we can see shifts between the class. We can try to understand why is there movement between the classes. And the numbers are surprisingly stable. Like, a lot of people do stick with their first choice. Obviously, you see the number of knights dropping because it's a very popular class to start with. But knowing that means also understanding is that we can't change that. We could change it artificially by making Imperial agents super powerful, but that would not be the right thing to do. I think the right thing for us is to understand they're different. We want people to give everything a shot, and we want them to come away with a really, really good gameplay experience if they choose an agent. And you've seen some of the story. I actually think it's some of the best story in the game is on the agent class. Some of the best characters you encounter on that class. But we're giving them equal love for combat, for skills, for cinematics time, these kind of things. But we don't expect players to do that, if that answers your question.
No, very thoroughly. I appreciate that.
So one of the things that's going to be interesting, since we're talking about companions, is the additional micromanagement of a player using their companion, especially with things like flashpoints where they actually have to replace another player. How do you approach dealing with the fact that players are going to have to rely on using something additional that isn't necessarily their character? I mean, in simple terms, yes, it's just pressing another button to make Khalil throw a grenade, but it's still something else that they have to manage.
So, for the solo game, or for the game that, like, the casual game that you play, without going into flashpoints at this point, I think our goal is that you can play it and rely on the AI to do the right thing. And if that means that Cleo isn't going to throw her grenade, so be that. If you are a player that wants to use all the tools they have, and you use that additional grenade, you equip her with optimum weaponry for the role that you're using her in, and so on, we expect you to do better. You will be able to take on harder content than a player that wouldn't. That's fine. At least fine with us.
Right.
If you go into a flashpoint, that becomes a bit of a different scenario. There's going to be, let's say there's, the most prevalent scenario will probably be 3 guys going in a flashpoint and filling one slot with a companion character. I would expect the person who gets their companion character out in that situation to be willing to micromanage them. Because in the end, you're trying to get a full player slot filled there. Companions, AI-wise, can probably fill 60% of a player, of a standard player. They won't replace ever a really good player anyway. But if you micromanage your companion, if you actually make sure you juggle aggro with them and so on, I think you can make the difference that allows your group to play a flashpoint, even though it is designed for 4 players. It will be hard. And so, I mean, some of you guys have played 2+2. It's definitely not easy. Right? And that was the first flashpoint where we were still in the, like, soft gloves mode. Right?
The soft gloves are pretty hard. Right.
Yeah. So, we're also looking definitely at the feedback we're getting and see if we can make more improvements to the way the AI is configured on those characters. You have the companion kits right now. We're looking at various things to make that easier. What we don't want people to go away with is everyone is a pet class. Because we don't see companions as pets. I think there's something more substantial, and they contribute to different parts of the game almost equally, be it your story, be it your combat experience, and maybe even your open PvP experience, right? But we also don't want them to become like hindering, right? So yes, you can play ignoring your companion. I don't think it's a good idea to play without him or her, because then you're missing out on free DPS or free hits that they could take for you, and missing out on some really great utility like sending them home to do trash. But if you really want to, yeah, you can send them on missions and you can venture alone. It will just be harder, right? But in general, yes, if they are running out there with you and you don't touch them, it should be enough to get you going for most of the game. But if you want to do the more challenging stuff, maybe you want to try to venture into a heroic territory, which is really hard, then you are expected to micro-control them.
So going with the roles, and some of us were able to actually make it to a capital city and pick advanced classes, and we know that every advanced class has two specific paths or trees, or I'm not sure exactly, branches that are unique to that advanced class, and there's one shared that's unique to both advanced classes for that. Is the shared class tree going to be designed to be a unique role like the other two would be, or is it a utility one that just supplements each additional side? So can that role be utilized by for a scoundrel or a gunslinger? Could both of those ideally spec into a nearly similar path by focusing on that central tree?
They're similar, but not. It's a bit hard to explain without actually taking the talents out. Right. A good example, I think, let's say on the Sith Warrior, the Marauder versus the Juggernaut, is that center shared tree contains things that are useful for both. And right now it's, I think, a balanced kind of DPS spec with a lot of support capabilities added, like control. So that's something that both of the classes want, but by the virtue of how your class works, how your advanced class changes how your class works, they're going to be still playing different. Like if you have two lightsabers and medium armor, versus the one lightsaber guy with his heavy armor and all the other skills that, and the base class abilities, as well as, and I'm not sure if this has ever been spoken out that clearly. If you are a Juggernaut, you still get abilities from your advanced class as you level up that you don't pick through the skill trees. So those differentiate as well, in addition to the things that you pick in the skill trees. Well, can you give us an update on the status of multiplayer companions in multiplayer content? They are in open world PvP. They're not in war zones. That's pretty much it.
Right now, in testing.
Yeah. Yeah, we might always we always reserve the right to come to conclusions that something doesn't work and then change it. We really have no problem walking back on decisions we make if they don't work out in gameplay.